Welcome, everyone. So glad to have all of you here. Um, so delighted to have all of you joining us for today's our fourth Meet VCU Authors event of the spring semester with the Humanities Research Center. My name is Hilary Levinson. I am an associate professor in the Department of Focused Inquiry and also the assistant director of the HRC. I am filling in today for our director, Dr. Christina Stanchu, who is currently serving as a visiting professor in France. She hopefully is settling in and having a great time there. And then, as always, assisting me today, we have my wonderful colleague, Ellie Musgrave. The HRC has many exciting events happening this spring. You can see a list of all of them on our website, which is still quite new as of this summer. I will draw your attention in particular to our Humanities Symposium, which is happening on April 23rd and is going to feature presentations by both students and faculty. We're really excited about that. And also, if you do not already receive the HRC newsletter, you can sign up for that at the link in the chat, or a link that should be there momentarily. And then finally, we also have our brand new or almost brand new 2025 annual report, which we launched just a couple of weeks ago. And you can read a copy of that. It's also available on our website just to learn more about our mission. So I am delighted to introduce our guest for today. Today is our Meet VCU Authors series, which invites colleagues and students from VCU and other universities to meet our very own VCU authors as they talk about their recent publications and answer questions about their work. We started in this webinar format during the pandemic, but it's been so successful that we have continued with it. And a special thing about it is that because of the format, our attendees often hail from many states. Even sometimes we get folks from abroad. And this is, a particular pleasure because Meet VCU Authors is really a time of celebration. Publications take many years to complete. And so our virtual event today follows a more or less similar format. If you've joined us before, I'm going to introduce our guest, who will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we will have time from questions from the audience. We are going to record Dr. Trisko Darden's discussion, which you'll then be able to access later on our HRC YouTube channel, but we will not record the Q&A. So just so you know that. Um, and so now it is really my absolute pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Jessica Trisko Darden, who is Associate Professor of Political Science here at VCU. She also runs the Insecurity Lab here. Dr. Trisko Darden was one of our residential fellows here at the HRC in 2024-2025. And she's also an active member of our Memory Studies Lab. I personally am particularly pleased to be introing Dr. Trisko Darden today because I've gotten to know her work and this project in particular through her work with the Memory Studies Lab. So really excited to see this having been brought to fruition. Her research in general focuses on the relationship between gender, conflict, law, and international development. She is the author of 4 university press books, including her most recent book, which is the subject of today's discussion, The Accused: How Women Escaped Justice for Nazi War Crimes. Her other books are Women as War Criminals, Gender, Agency, and Justice, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2020 with Isabella Stiflia, and Insurgent Women, Female Combatants in Civil Wars from Georgetown University Press in 2019 with Alexis Henshaw and Ora Shekeli. Her 2020 book, Aiding and Abetting U.S. Foreign Assistance and State Violence, which also was published by Stanford University Press, was described by William Easterly as, quote, a critical book at a time when the U.S. approach to human rights is in deep crisis and global human rights are in grave danger. In addition to these 4 books, Dr. Trisko Darden has published numerous peer-reviewed articles on gender and conflict, political violence, legal accountability for perpetrators, and alliance dynamics in venues such as Media, War, and Conflict, Social and Legal Studies, and Women's Studies International Forum. And Dr. Trisko Darden is also really committed to public scholarship. She's contributed op-eds and commentary on international politics and conflict to the Baltimore Sun, The Conversation, The Economist, The Guardian, Newsweek, The New York Times, U.S. News and World Report, and The Washington Post, among others. She's also been interviewed by a number of media organizations and podcasts, including the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, BBC World Service, CNN, The Globe and Mail, NPR On Point, The Today Show, and The Wall Street Journal. And she is also a non-resident fellow at the George Washington University's program on extremism, as well as a research affiliate with William and Mary's Global Research Institute. Dr. Trisko Darden's latest book and the subject of her talk today is The Accused: How Women Escaped Justice for Nazi War Crimes, which just came out from Yale University Press. As she explains, to date, our understanding of women's participation in Nazi war crimes has been shaped by political decisions made by men, which reflect entrenched gender norms that diminish both women's agency and their accountability. In The Accused, Professor Trisko Darden offers a corrective to this, providing a groundbreaking and holistic account of the variety of war crimes that women of all ages committed during the Nazi era, as well as the range of legal outcomes that they faced following the Second World War. By analyzing the archival records of German trials, Dr. Trisko Darden observes that post-war divisions in Germany contributed to disparities in sentencing between men and women, which in turn allowed some women, particularly those in West Germany, to receive more lenient sentences than others, or even to be acquitted altogether. Her rigorous analysis of these women's cases makes an important contribution to scholarship on women's agency and culpability in perpetrating violence. So, Dr. Trisko Darden, many, many congratulations on the publication of this new book, and welcome to meet VCU authors. I will let you take it away.
I want to thank Dr. Levinson for that incredibly generous introduction, thorough and generous. I'm really excited to share my work with you today, in part because this project has been, I think, born entirely of my time at VCU. This is the first major undertaking that I've produced since joining VCU in 2021. And so I'm really excited to share it with you all today. The book officially comes out next week, so you're getting the first kind of preview of its content. And of course, I welcome any feedback you have on this presentation, more information that you'd like to know that would be good to share with an audience as I do plan on doing more of these public talks. So where to start? I'm a professor of political science, but my particular focus is on women's agency, particularly as violent political actors. So I've studied civil wars, terrorism, and my interest in this group of women that I label the accused is directly related to that. So before I give you kind of the origin story of this whole project, I do want to thank all of my colleagues from my various aspects of VCU life that are joining me today. I really appreciate it. I have so much gratitude for you, but also the many colleagues that I haven't yet had the opportunity to meet. Thank you for taking your time today and spending it with me. As Dr. Levinson noted, I was a residential fellow with the Humanities Research Center. That was a wonderful opportunity to meet new colleagues and engage in transdisciplinary conversations about my work. I'm also a member of the Memory Studies Lab. This project in particular benefited from funding from the Office of the Vice President for Research and Innovation, as well as the College of Humanities and Sciences through the Dean's Research Grant. I also benefited from the engagement of multiple federal work study students in the departments of English, the Wilder School, political science, as well as computer science and engineering. So I've had the opportunity to kind of engage a lot of students in this research as well. So I want to begin at the beginning, right? Why did I undertake this investigation and what exactly was I investigating? And so, as was referenced, my previous book was on women as war criminals. And that book examined 4 women who were accused of war crimes in Rwanda, the former Yugoslavia, in Iraq, and in the conflict with the Islamic State group. And in examining these four cases from various different backgrounds, women who had radically different life stories, I really grappled with the idea of what the precedent or what framework we should apply to understand the experiences of these women. And in doing so, I wanted to examine how women's prosecutions for war crimes had been handled in a broader historical time frame. And I kept asking myself, okay, well, what happened to the women who were involved in Nazi era crimes? And while there has been some great scholarship on it, including Wendy Lauer's Hitler's Furies, oh, you can't see it, which I recommend. It was relatively narrow in scope, similar to the work that I was doing. It focused on 4 or 5 prominent women. In some instances, work focused on a single woman. And I wanted a much broader understanding of what was going on. So I asked myself some important starting questions, right? How has our imagination constrained our understanding of this phenomenon? How do we imagine the women of the Nazi era? And a really great example of this is up on your screen. This is an actual cover from a 1977 Marvel comic. We have it at the VCU library. And you can really see here how the Nazi woman was reimagined in the post-war era as this kind of hypersexualized, aggressive individual who dealt with a range of stereotypes that are typically associated with women. But then I also ask myself, where do these popular depictions come from? And do they have any relationship to the reality of the women who perpetrated atrocities under the Nazi regime? And when you actually look at the content of popular culture, we are led to believe that Nazi women look a certain way, right? We have our example of Warrior Woman, who was a famous Nazi scientist who was investigating superhuman strength and accidentally spilled her concoction on herself and grew to colossal proportions. But we also have women like Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, who was a character in a 1975 sexploitation film where essentially she was a sadistic camp commandant. She was a medical doctor who engaged in experimentation on not only Jewish prisoners, but also American ones. Her underlings were seen flogging people topless throughout the film. And it's really this intense caricature of what a sexual imagining of women in the Nazi era was. Over time, this gets balanced out a little bit. We have The Reader, which is a Hollywood adaptation of a 1990s German novel, where we have Academy Award-winning actor Kate Winslet play a former concentration camp guard. She's displayed as kind of being naive and vulnerable. But the question remained, how did these depictions bear any relationship to the reality of what women did and who those women were? And that brings me to the reality of the accused, which is far less glamorous. So here we have a photograph taken by the official British Army photographer upon the capture of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where they interned female concentration camp guards. So we see 4 women in this image. They're relatively young in age. They're wearing their official uniforms, and all of these women were German camp guards. A lot less glamorous than the Hollywood and other American depictions would have us believe. So I'm going to spend the remainder of my time with you talking about the various crimes that these women were accused of and how legal prosecutions and community-based accountability mechanisms dealt with them after the war. So first, I'm going to read you one of the many cases that I deal with in The Accused. So this was a summary of a prosecution that occurred in the District Court of Dresden. The final verdict in the case was handed down in 1947. I will note that the surnames are abbreviated because under German privacy law, that is the standard protocol. So you'll see a kind of abbreviation of the surname. Hilde Fick rented out rooms in her home while her husband served in the military. After a heated argument in 1941, she reported her elderly tenant, Doris, for insulting her husband, World War I veterans, and Hitler. Doris was arrested by the Gestapo. She was diagnosed as a psychopath and sent to a sanatorium where she died in 1944, likely under the Nazi euthanasia program. After the war, Hilde was charged with crimes against humanity and received 2 years probation and a fine for reporting her tenant. In this particular case, we see several dynamics at play. So in this instance, the accused husband is off serving in the military. So she is a married woman who is left to manage household affairs. We see intergenerational dynamics where she's acting or interacting with a tenant who in this case is an elderly woman. Her husband was also a tenant in the home, right? And we see this effort to kind of manage the complex social dynamics of the household by resorting to filing a report with the Gestapo. We also see the interplay of different dynamics within the Nazi regime. So not only is the Gestapo responsive to this report against Doris, we also see under the Nazi euthanasia program, which targeted mentally ill individuals or individuals who were seen as having uncurable conditions, that Doris was likely killed as part of that euthanasia program. It's not definitive, but she did die in the sanatorium. We also see the way that accountability occurs, but it's not clear that the accountability that is handed down fits the crime, so to speak. So Hilde receives 2 years of probation and a fine. In the longer summary in the book, the court states that it understands that she was in a vulnerable position without her husband, having to manage these really complex dynamics. She was quite young, in her early 20s. And so she simply did the wrong thing because she didn't know how to handle this really complicated dynamic. And as a result, she wasn't really worthy of jail time because she didn't understand how significant her report would be. So we do see a lot of sympathy for women who perpetrated these acts of atrocity. In another case in the book, it's a little later, the verdict is handed down in 1951. We see again the real complex dynamics that individual accused face. So Hildegard M., once a farm worker with no criminal record, was arrested by the Gestapo for sexual relations with Polish men and sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. Near the war's end, she joined the camp police. She was accused of beating inmates and taking part in the killing of newborns. The court accepted that Hildegard had been victimized, but ruled that she willingly adopted Nazi ideology. She received a 10-year prison sentence for crimes against humanity and permanently lost her pension and her political rights. So Hildegard is a less sympathetic accused than our prior one, right? So she came from a kind of troubled social background. She was clearly violating the norms of the Nazi regime, and this landed her in a concentration camp. So she was, in effect, a political prisoner, right? However, she joins the camp police and ends up operating as a prisoner functionary. Often the colloquial term used is capos, but essentially prisoners who were elevated to the status of guards while remaining prisoners. And their responsibility was to ensure order within the camps. So Hildegard was accused of using physical force against other inmates and then assisting in the disposal of newborn infants within the camps, because of course women would arrive pregnant. the court really struggled with this case, right? It acknowledges her victimization as a political prisoner, but also acknowledges her agency, right? In identifying that she joined the camp police, right? She didn't have to. She could have made other choices in that context. But more importantly, once she joined the camp police, she really embraced the ideology and the rule through violence that was associated with that position. At the same time, the question of whether a 10-year sentence is appropriate, whether losing her state pension and political rights is appropriate, these were really complicated questions in this particular era. So while I examine hundreds of the accused in the book, what I'm really going to focus on in this particular presentation is the judgment that was imposed on these women. So we have two examples from our cases, but I'm going to talk through some more in-depth manifestations of that judgment. Um, so immediately after the war, or when Nazi occupying forces withdrew from particular territories, we saw a wave of what I term community accountability measures. And one particular form of community accountability was the forcible shaving of women's heads. And these particular images were taken by members of the Allied military who publicly witnessed and documented these events. One image is from the Netherlands and one from France. But you can see very similar dynamics at play throughout Western Europe. So initially, women who were accused of collaborating with the Nazi occupiers, whether that was through personal relationships, economic relationships, sexual relationships, were rounded up by members of their community, identified and rounded up by members of the community. In some instances, as one of these pictures depicts, they were stripped down to their undergarments. In some instances, they were stripped naked, though that was relatively more rare. And individuals from the community, almost exclusively male, then forcibly shaved their heads as a way of publicly identifying and shaming these women. In some instances, the women were subsequently prosecuted in courtrooms as well. But in many cases, the kind of public humiliation was the community level catharsis, and it ended there, right? So it's really important to note that in some instances, in some localities, this type of accountability was seen as doing more for justice than the courtroom-based accountability that would follow, in part because it was rapid. It allowed community members to participate in the imposition of punishments on these women, right? And it also came with other kind of community-based practices, right, such as ostracization. And so while today these images seem very shocking, at the time this practice was supported broadly by communities. And so it's hard to tell in the crowd image, but you can tell from the hair in the foreground and in the background, the faces, that there are many, many women who are also observing and participating in these events as well. What is clear, though, is that this kind of community level accountability also led to kind of widespread stigmatization of women who had in some way become engaged with the occupying forces. This community accountability could also intersect with legal accountability. So this image displays Stella Kubler, who went by a range of names. Her birth name was Goldschlag. where she was formally investigated and, in fact, prosecuted multiple times for her collaboration with the Gestapo. So Stella was born and raised in Berlin. She was of Jewish heritage, but was raised as a Protestant until she was forced out of her school because of the Nuremberg laws, at which point she went to a Jewish school because she could no longer attend her previous one. Uh, she and her parents avoided being arrested by the Gestapo in Berlin by living illegally with non-Jewish friends, frequently moving homes. But in 1943, she was arrested by the Gestapo, and because of her features, she was blonde haired and blue eyed. She was offered the opportunity to work with the Gestapo, essentially helping them locate other Jews who were in hiding. She opted to do this in order to protect her family from deportation from Berlin. It worked for a while. She was involved in incidents where the Gestapo identified Jews who were attending the opera, who were in hiding. She would essentially bait members of the Jewish community by offering them fake papers. And when those transactions happened, they would be arrested. Overall, she was accused by members of the Berlin Jewish community of having denounced approximately 2,000 Jews to the Gestapo. However, it didn't actually prevent her family from being deported. They eventually were. And after the war, the Jewish community of Berlin that remained really pushed for her accountability. So you see here, she's being interviewed by the occupying forces. She actually faced prosecution by Soviet military tribunal. She then faced prosecution later in Germany. Some of her prosecutions were disrupted by health and mental health concerns, but her final trial took place largely in 1972. So we see how long Stella's journey to accountability took. And essentially, she was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but that sentence was adjusted to reflect the time that she had already served in a Soviet military prison. Um, and I offer this really complicated, complex story. There's a whole book written about Stella. I don't know how good it is, but it's out there to really demonstrate this kind of time lag in communities' quests for justice against particular accused women. This image is of Ilse Koch. She was the wife of a SS officer who was named Commandant of Buchenwald. There's also actually a wonderful recent history of Ilse Koch called Ilse Koch on Trial, Making the Bitch of Buchenwald, that details, again, the 3 prosecutions that were undertaken against her. Allegations against Ilse included that she sexually abused concentration camp prisoners, that she used forced labor at her estate, that she used the tattooed skin of prisoners to make lampshades. There was no evidence of that, although there is some evidence that there was a photo album that may have been covered in human skin, owned by the family. She went through this kind of extensive accountability process, both through these various trials, but also in the press. She was really one of the first individual females associated with the Nazi regime who was very, very sensationalized by the press for a very extended period of time. And I think it's important to note that she was essentially accused of crimes that could only occur through her relationship to her husband, right, who was an SSF officer and commandant, right? She herself had no power separate from the power that he was able to exert or she was able to exert on his behalf. And so this makes her a very interesting case, right? Because all of her power in this context comes through her spousal relationship. And there are kind of series of these interesting cases in the book that I'm now working on as a separate research project on spousal accountability. So wait to hear more about that. I think that I'm happy to go into more of these cases, but I really want to have the opportunity to engage with you in the Q&A and learn more kind of what interests you and what aspects of this era it would be worth talking more about, engaging around, because I think that there is such a richness of cases here that I don't know how much to share. Um, so if we have any questions or thoughts, I would love to engage with you more about that. Thanks.